And the first thing we want to do is we want to remove name equals notification, because otherwise it would give us an error that it's already added. So we'll remove the current one, the default one, and now we're going to change some of the parameters. So let's quickly go through the attributes that are available in the buffer mode. In this case, notification, the first one is max buffer size. That's the maximum number of events that can be buffered. The max flush size is the maximum number of events that can be flushed with each time the buffer is flushed, and that value cannot exceed the max buffer size. Now the next three attributes here have to do with the intervals at which the events are flushed from the buffer. So for example, the regular flush interval attribute says, flush the events from the buffer at this regular interval, and let's make that 5. Whereas we have also these two attributes which pertain to urgent flush thresholds, and or I should say urgent flushes of the buffer. And what this means is that whenever the buffer size gets to this threshold, it's considered urgent, and then the buffer must be flushed at the corresponding urgent flush interval. So let's say whenever it gets to 5, that would be considered an urgent threshold, and then we would flush the buffer every 1 minute or compared to 5 in the regular interval. And the last attribute is the number of threads, the maximum number of threads that can be used for the flushing process. So that's the buffer modes element, which, as I said, essentially allows you to set up some parameters that buffer the health monitoring events in memory, and then controls when those are flushed out to the corresponding providers. And this can help in performance in the health monitoring system. So the last thing that we need to look at is back up in the root element, health monitoring. And in health monitoring, there are a couple attributes that you can set here. One important one is enabled. And as the name implies, this either turns on or turns off health monitoring. So we'll turn it on. And the next attribute that we want to look at is called heartbeat interval. And this is a time interval in seconds. So for example, if we put, let's say 5 here, that would mean that what's called the web heartbeat event, which is down here, you see on line 32, we were previously talking about the different types of built-in events. And what this does up here in this attribute is if we set this to 5 minutes, what would happen is every 5 minutes this web heartbeat event would be automatically fired by the health monitoring system, and it contains a range of information about the current functioning of your ASP.NET application. So if you don't put this attribute in the health monitoring element, then the heartbeat is not fired automatically at any predefined interval. So if you want it to be fired and to give you an indication of what's going on in the overall application at a regular interval, then you would need to put this attribute. And one more quick last correction I realized is that the heartbeat interval is just in seconds. I was thinking that it was hours, minutes, seconds, like some of the other intervals that we've had. So the value here should just be, in this case, 10 for every 10 seconds. One more quick thing before we move on and look at the health monitoring in action, and that is, I forgot to mention down here in the profiles, there are 2 default profiles that come out of the box, and I've copied them from the documentation on MSDN. Let me just paste them in here in the web.config, so when you get the sample code, you can see what parameters go with the default and critical profiles that come out of the box. So let's take a look at our health monitoring in action. We have the default ASPX page, which I've left unchanged since we created the project, so that will be blank. And here on our web.config, we have our heartbeat interval set to every 10 seconds. So every 10 seconds, we should get our web heartbeat event fired. And then down here in the rules, what I did is set up a rule called heartbeat default. it's mapped to the heartbeats event up above, and it writes to the Windows event log. And I set the profile equal to critical, which you can see down here is one of the default profiles, and that will essentially write out the event every time it's fired. So let's go ahead and start up the website, and we'll get our default ASPX page, which, as I said, will just be a blank page. Now while that's running there, let me flip over to the event log and we'll look at the application event log. And let me hit the refresh button here, and you'll see that we're getting these web events every 10 seconds that the application is running. So the last one here is at 13:45, and let me refresh again. Now we have another one here, 13:45, 59, and so on. So these are showing up in our event log based upon the health monitoring system being configured. And if we flip back over to Visual Studio, let's shut down the web page and just very quickly review the different sections that we've covered here in this video. First is we looked at the standard events that come with the health monitoring system. I've listed them here in the web.config file in the sample code. And then we looked at event mapping, essentially how you add an event. In this case, we're removing and adding one of the standard events just to show you how it works. Then next we looked at the different providers. Remember, providers are classes that write out the event information to a specific source, and out of the box you have several of them. The event log, which we just saw with the heartbeat event, you have SQL, WMI, mail, and trace providers. So next we had down here rules. Rules essentially connect the event to a specific provider using a specified profile. Now we could have put the specific criteria in the rule, but the profile abstracts that out, and down here we have altered the default profile, and as I said, out of the box there's two profiles, default and critical. And then the last thing we looked at is buffer modes, which control the buffering of event information to help with performance. So this is an extremely powerful system that allows you to configure all kinds of information to monitoring the health of a live application. I encourage you to download the sample source code, take a look at it in more detail, as well as refer to the MSDN documentation to get a better idea on some of the details of how you can implement health monitoring for your own system. This is Chris Pelz. Thanks for watching this video on implementing health monitoring in an ASP.NET application.